students in the classroom. So we're going to start by going over the practice regions we had done in class to go over some of the issues that I had noticed. Then I'll go over some tips, and I'll go over some of the questions that have been asked of me. I want to reiterate, you should be asking me questions in the Google form that I had posted for student choice. So far, a lot of what's been sent to me has just been a list of topics. All of the topics have been addressed in our Regents review. There's a number of resources in our Google Classroom that go over these topics. So I don't want to use this opportunity to just reiterate content that I've already taught and you already have access to resources on. What I want to use this for is an opportunity for you to get clarification for things that still don't make sense to you. So if I'm given a list of topics, I'm going to tell you to see the resources in Google Classroom, and I'll point you in that direction, because it doesn't make sense for me to just go over all this content. I also have over 3 hours of live video stream from last year's Regents that does go over all the content. So again, I would watch those and look at your resources and then ask me if you have any questions. So my computer is being a little weird, and I was having trouble with volume, and I was having trouble getting my camera to work. But it does seem like it's at least picking up my voice now, so hopefully this works out. And I'm sorry that my live stream is being a little funky, but it looks like we should be good. Okay. So hopefully I'll just post this and you guys can watch this another time. But we are doing global history and geography today. Where we had looked at the January 2018 region, so just this past January in class. And I want to remind you that your test on Tuesday is the transitional exam. So the page will look just like this when you get it. However, part 1 will only be 30 multiple choice questions. Part 2 will still be your thematic essay based on a theme. And then part 3 will be the essay you write based on several documents. So you have to answer all the questions for all of the documents, and then you'll write an essay based on those documents. And remember, you have to use outside information. So when we get to that point, I will point out a couple tips and tricks for you. So when you get to part 1, it will be only 30 questions. So anything you see on my screen that has to do with Global 9 content will not be on the test. However, they usually do start out with either a math question or a question about social scientists, or some kind of like general knowledge question about like primary, secondary sources. So like question 1, which primary source would most likely provide a perspective of Indian nationalists? So an Indian nationalist would be someone like Gandhi. So you could do 1, a diary entry of a Hindu participant in the Salt March, because a diary would be a primary source. And a Hindu who participated in the Salt March is obviously an Indian nationalist, because they are someone who wanted independence for India from Great Britain. A letter written by the English viceroy in India, while that's a primary source, that is with English perspective. The painting of an Armistice massacre created by a Christian missionary, again, that would be a Christian, so it wouldn't be an Indian nationalist who would be painting that. It'd be from their perspective. This is a United Nations document about the partition of British India. Again, the United Nations are not Indian nationalists, so that would not count. But this is an example of one of those like primary source questions that you might see in the beginning. So, you know, if you're going through, the answer to this is 1. Okay. 2, so it says periods of famine, warfare, and religious perspective have most often influenced people's decisions to, so you have to think about like what would famine, warfare, and religious persecution all have in common. Well, if people are faced with famine and warfare, they're not collectivizing their farms. They're not merging farms. It's wartime. It says migrate from a region, expand their territory, and industrialize an area. So if you are faced with famine, you're going to be more concerned with starvation than industrializing. You're just trying to meet your basic needs during times of war. Again, like your focus is war. So if you're already industrialized, that would switch over to wartime industries, but that's really not the best fit. Also, people who are being religiously persecuted and suffering from famine are not going to go and expand their territory because they're already kind of on the outskirts of society. They're starving, they're being persecuted. So your best option here is to migrate from a region. So an example of this would be the potato famine in Ireland. It led to a lot of people in Ireland fleeing to the United States and also Great Britain looking for work. Warfare, people migrate from a region. So think about refugees fleeing Syria right now. These are people that are migrating. They are fleeing for their lives to try to escape warfare. And then religious persecution. So you could think about Jewish people fleeing Russia due to persecution, or even leaving Europe during persecution after Hitler rose to power. So try to think these through. If you're not certain, just think about what would make the most sense. And then you'll see question 3 here starts to get into global 9, because this is the previous regions. It's not the transitional regions. So we're going to go ahead and start to skip down to the questions that we had done in class that people had struggled with. So the first question that people struggled with was from this section here. So this, I think a lot of people saw this large text passage and panicked. And then it also had 3 questions that went along with it. So like I always say, work smart, not hard. So when you are looking at these questions in this massive amount of text, don't just jump into the reading. You want to know what you're reading for so that you can kind of figure out what's important as you go. So 26 says the main idea of this passage is that during times of war, and it asks about strict surveillance should be limited, ill treatment of aliens should be carefully investigated. So aliens were referred to people who have come to the nation who are not citizens, not little like green men aliens. 3, police should have the power to naturalize aliens. That would mean police should have the power to give aliens citizenship. 4, some people's rights should be suspended for the greater good. So after you read your question and you read some of these options, I would then go and look at the source of the document. So the source would be The Alien Peril, The War by Nelson's Picture Weekly in October 31st, 1914. So when I look at the source, I would try to figure out where in history this falls. So you should know that by 1914, this is World War I. So we're talking about World War I here. We're talking about aliens, the alien peril. So people who are coming into the nation. And since this is 3 questions for this one passage, I'm going to just start with the first question. And it says, so the main idea of this passage. So let's see. The right course, and it is the course which the country, Great Britain, will presently insist upon, is to segregate all German residents. So German residents are these aliens. So it makes sense, or like they want to segregate German residents. They want to segregate Germans living in Great Britain. Great Britain's at war with Germany. So this reminds me of what the United States did when they took Japanese American citizens and they segregated them into internment camps. So there should be no ill treatment, but they must be kept under strict surveillance. So they must be watched carefully. An honest man will understand the necessity and will not complain, and it will put an end to the activities of the dishonest. So the main passage of this idea, or passage, would be, well, they're not saying strict surveillance should be limited, right? Because they want to surveil them. Ill treatment of aliens should be carefully investigated. Well, they're not talking about ill treatment. They said there should be no ill treatment, but they didn't say they should investigate it. And it says police should have the power to naturalize aliens. I already know, but you should be able to figure this out, which one of these fit the best without reading the whole thing. Like in the beginning, they're not talking about it, but there is one that they have talked about. Now, if you aren't certain, you can continue to read to get an idea of what this passage is about. But just by looking at it, they're talking about putting people in segregated areas, keeping them under surveillance. Like, this is a violation of people's rights. They're like, we should be suspending this for greater goods. And they're like, an honest man's going to understand this is a necessity. They're not going to complain. 27 says the reason presented in this passage should logically lead to German residents being placed in. So they talked about to segregate all German residents right here. So if they're going to segregate them, they're going to be putting them into relocation camps, right? Then 28, which statement offers a view that criticizes the author's argument? So what I'm showing you right now is I read about half of this paragraph and was able to figure out what this is about. If you aren't certain, then keep reading. Because that can help you narrow down other answers that you're not certain of. So for example, if you're still on 26 and you're like, I'm just not certain if this is about restricting people's rights, you could keep reading. And what you could see is they say there's no reason to believe that it is a certain type of naturalized Germans that is most dangerous. Power should be given to cancel temporarily nationalization certificates. So what that means is that power should be given to maybe remove citizenship. So again, that's another right that's being taken. These people have applied for citizenship in Great Britain, even though they have originally come from Germany. They've gotten citizenship, and now you want to temporarily take that away from them. So again, taking a right away. But never says that the police should be able to give them citizenship. It doesn't say anything about investigating ill treatment. And it definitely does not say that strict surveillance should be limited. So again, if you're trying to figure these out and you can't, keep reading. But what I'm hoping you see here is that when you come across large chunks of text, don't be lazy and just not read it and try to guess. Because that's where I see a lot of people get these questions wrong. They're like, oh, well, I just guessed. I didn't want to read the paragraph. Read, because you probably only have to read about half of that paragraph. So let's look at question 28, because this is a lot of people got wrong in class. So it says, which statement offers a view that criticizes the author's argument? So if the author is arguing that we should suspend rights for the greater good and then place German residents in relocation camps, then what's kind of the opposite of that? So it says, one, prejudice is being presented in the form of patriotism. So they're saying people are being prejudiced against German people, and they're trying to say this is patriotism and for the greater good. So that makes some sense. So let's see if our other answers are better options. So self-interest is being sacrificed for the sake of security. Well, that would support his statement, because he says, like, you know, a good person, an honest person would understand the need to suspend these rights. They would sacrifice their rights for the good of all. 3, appeasement is being suggested as a response to aggression. So appeasement is when you appease an aggressor. You give in to someone like Hitler to allow them to get what they want so you don't have to deal with conflict. That's not what's being talked about here. They're not talking about giving in to an aggressor. They're talking about rights. So really this should be about rights. 4, compassion is being portrayed as the best policy. Well, that doesn't really criticize what he's saying either. It's not that compassion is being portrayed as the best policy. I mean, someone might argue that we should be compassionate against these people from Germany, but that's not really criticizing his actual argument. That's just like an alternative. Like the best answer here would be, one, prejudice is being presented in the forms of patriotism. They're saying like we need to take people of German descent living in England and put them in camps because we're at war. And like you're being prejudiced. You're going after these people who live in Great Britain, who have lived peaceful lives only because we're at war with Germany. And he even finishes up. He says, these may seem harsh measures, but war is a harsh business. When our soldiers and sailors are giving up their lives for their country, it would be a scandal if we endangered their work by any inaction at home. So, like, it's patriotism. Our men are giving up their lives. So those are the answers here, and hopefully you can see how I like work through and try to reason. Don't just go with something if you're not certain. Try to think it through. Ask yourself if these questions or these answers make sense. Okay. 29 was another question that people got wrong. So it says Bloody Sunday in Russia, the Armenian Massacre in the Ottoman Empire are both examples of. So I think Bloody Sunday, a massacre, like obviously something bad is happening in these. So even if you didn't know what they are, just think about Bloody Sunday, Armenian Massacre. If there's a massacre, people are dying. So it says scorched earth policies. Well, just because you're burning land, like scorched earth policy means like you're burning the land as you kind of retreat in battle or in a military campaign, kind of like the Russians did with Napoleon when Napoleon tried to invade Russia. And as the Russians pulled back, they burned everything. That's not really a massacre of people. That's you just burning crops. Forced migrations. Well, sometimes when people are forced to migrate, it might lead to death. But that's not necessarily a connection here. And 3 are human atrocities. Well, a Bloody Sunday or a massacre, you definitely consider a massacre a human atrocity. So atrocity would be, a situation where a large number of people have their rights violated or perhaps they're killed. The Holocaust would be a human atrocity. The Rwandan genocide or the ethnic cleansing in the Balkans are all examples of human atrocities. So I would say that's the best option. But then I would keep reading and be like, political revolutions. Well, a massacre, could be part of political revolution, but it's certainly a human atrocity. So the best option here, just by thinking this through, thinking about the name Bloody Sunday, Armenian Massacre, is this is a human atrocity. So just to give you some background, Bloody Sunday was early before the Russian Revolution took place and the Bolsheviks rose up. But we saw that where people were already starting to revolt against Tsar Nicholas II. They're already upset and demanded that he reform society to help the people. And a number of citizens, mostly peasants led by a priest, marched to the palace. And they went to the palace with a petition, so a letter asking the Tsar to make these changes. And they were met by the Russian military who killed them. They opened fire on these unarmed civilians, killing almost 100 people, and that's why it became known as Bloody Sunday. The Armenian Massacre in the Ottoman Empire is in 1915. During World War I, we saw that the Armenians, who were mostly Christian, were being massacred in the Ottoman Empire. And you have many people are being killed, innocent civilians being killed. So if you can't remember what they are, just think it through. Think, well, Bloody Sunday, Armenian Massacre, like these are bad things happening to people, and you can kind of reason it out. And the other thing you should keep in mind for like the Regents questions is think, what's the best answer? There might be like at the end, human atrocities and political revolutions. Well, maybe this is part of a political revolution, but the better answer is what they both are examples are certainly are human atrocities. In question 30, it says, which event led Russia to withdraw from World War I and surrender a significant amount of territory to Germany? So it says the sudden death of Vladimir Lenin. Well, that's not the case because Vladimir Lenin doesn't die until after the Russians already had a revolution and a civil war. The seizure of power by the Bolsheviks, so that could be the case because the Bolsheviks were the communists who held the revolution and overthrew Tsar Nicholas II. Says the meaning of the Yalta Conference. Well, that's not it. And the assassination of Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand, also not it, because that was what started World War I, but that's not what's going to lead Russia to withdraw from World War I. So if you got rid of at least 1 and 3, even if you weren't certain of 3, you should keep in mind what is going to make Russia withdraw from World War I. And I know on Friday in class, I had talked to some of you about the Russian Revolution, talked about the causes, and we had talked about Lenin promising peace, land, and bread. So peace, land, and bread. He's like, peace, I will pull us out of World War I because, our soldiers are not properly fed or clothed or get supplied. People are dying and we have people at home starving. So I will help us get peace and I will help us get access to food, that's bread. And then land, of course, you have a lot of poor peasants who just want a chance at life, at making life better, at possibly owning some land, of not watching their families starve. So the best answer here would be that the Bolsheviks seize power. Okay. Now, if you're like, well, I'm not certain which one is which, just keep in mind if you're stuck at like the Yalta Conference or the Bolsheviks, just if you see anything about Russia coming out of World War I, know that's the Bolshevik Revolution that is taking place. It's the Communist Revolution. Yalta is World War II. And so, we'll have more discussion of that later on. But they basically, at Yalta, that's kind of what the big leaders kind of talked about, what to do with Germany at the end of World War II. Okay. Let's see, our next one that we got wrong was 32. So 32 is a major purpose of the 5-year plans in the Soviet Union was to. So the 5-year plans was from Joseph Stalin. And I always joke around that there's no time for Stalin when you're rushing to industrialize. I had a little meme in class. But Stalin's 5-year plans is trying to increase production, and his focus is on heavy industry. So he isn't focused on consumer goods, which leads to a shortage of goods needed by the people. He's definitely not trying to eliminate central economic planning. So central economic planning is essentially communism. You have a central government planning out the economy, and he's definitely not going to eliminate that because Stalin had always criticized Lenin's new economic plan for allowing some capitalism. And since he's communist, he is not going to seek direct foreign investment. He is, leader of the Soviet Union, which is a major superpower. at least after like World War II, and he's going to use his power of the totalitarian regime that he's created, to kind of do things his way. But what he does do with this 5-year plan is increase the production of steel and machinery. So they're really focused on industrialization. So 5-year plans usually are tied to increase industrialization, increase in the production of steel and machinery, but you also might see them talk about collectivized farming, where he makes those communes and he takes farmland and combines it so that a community would work together on the farm. And of course, this led to a number of issues because farmers who had owned private land didn't want their land confiscated by the state. And so this led to farmers burning crops, killing animals, and then this led to famine. Okay. So the next question is 33. So what would be the best title for this chart? So it says events during World War I, totalitarian regimes between the wars, economic problems between the wars, or causes of World War II. So let's read. A lot of you, when we went over this, talked about you didn't know where to begin. So think about it this way, like a pyramid is built from the bottom up. So, start at the bottom, work your way up. So the base of this would be World War I. Then it says Treaty of Versailles, Germany must make reparations, lose African colonies, and take blame for causing war. Failure of European and world economies, high unemployment, failure of banks, start of Great Depression, rise of fascist leaders, Hitler in Germany, Mussolini in Italy, and Tojo in Japan. Military invasions, Germany invades Poland, Italy attacks Ethiopia, Japan invades China, World War II. So this isn't events during World War I because it goes right from World War I to the Treaty of Versailles, which ends World War I. It says totalitarian regimes between the wars. But again, we're looking for the best title. Well, they just mention in one section some of these fascist leaders, but they're not talking about totalitarian regimes between the wars in this whole chart. This is economic problems between the wars. So there's one section that talks about the failure of European world economy. So it's not the best option. That leaves for causes of World War II. So this is causes of World War II because World War I ends. You have this treaty which created resentment and anger in Germany. They had to make those reparations. They lost their colonies. They had to take all the blame. That really angered them. Then you have them struggle to rebuild because of the Great Depression. You have fascism rise up in response to all these problems. And then there's military invasions as Germany and Italy and Japan become aggressive and move into these other areas. And then, of course, World War II breaks out. So these are causes of World War II. Okay. And we did really well for this and went to 40. And 40, we had a cartoon that people struggled with. So it says, what is the main idea of this 2006 cartoon? So when I approach cartoons, what I like to do is read the question and then look at the source, look at information in the picture. So the source is Michael Ramirez, the New York Daily News, in February 18, 2006. And it says information superhighway right here. And you have this highway, and then it hits this wall. Over here it says China, and so I know a big, massive wall in China is the Great Wall. So this is obviously the Great Wall of China. So now I'm going to read my options and see if I can figure it out and see if any makes sense. And if there's some I know are wrong, but maybe I can't narrow it down to just one choice, then I'll go back to the cartoon. So the exportation of electronic information is essential to the Chinese economy. Well, they talk about the information superhighway and there's a wall, but they don't talk anything about it being essential to the Chinese economy or exporting electronic information. The flow of electronic information to China is controlled Well, it is hitting a wall, so that suggests some kind of blockage or maybe censorship. So maybe 3, China created the information superhighway. Well, there's nothing here that says it created it or would suggest that it was created. Like I said, there's the highway and it hits the Great Wall, but there's nothing that suggests they created it. And then the Great Wall protects Chinese information from being hacked. Well, that's just ridiculous because while the wall is an actual physical thing, it was built to stop invaders from the north from coming into China. That has nothing to do with technology. So what's left after I reason my way through is that the flow of electronic information in China is controlled. And if you're not certain, I'd go back and just say, can I prove that? Well, information superhighway is hidden the Great Wall. The Great Wall is acting as like a block, a barrier. So they're blocking information or access to information. So it's definitely controlled. But I also know that the internet in China is highly censored and controlled as well. So that's even something you can keep in mind. If you had an essay, like a thematic on technology, you could talk about the internet and how it allows us to gain access to information. But then you see some governments might censor their citizens' access to that information so that they can control the information that they're gaining access to, so they can limit or prevent them from finding out maybe what's going on in other nations, or even maybe what their nation's being criticized for. Okay, 41. So, which statement about the Green Revolution is a fact rather than opinion? So, there's a few of you who actually sent me, like, what was the Green Revolution? So, the Green Revolution is something we did one of the last weeks where we actually did new content. And I always say, thanks to Mr. Claff, if you see the Green Revolution, think salad. Salad is green, Green Revolution. So the Green Revolution has to do with new farming techniques, chemical fertilizers, GMO seeds, etc., trying to increase food production. This has been really successful in India, who has a very large population. But what's nice about this question is it's asking you what's a fact rather than an opinion. So even if you didn't know what the Green Revolution is, you should know the difference between a fact and an opinion. So answer 1 says the use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides has increased the yield per unit of land in some regions. Well, it doesn't sound like an opinion. They're not saying like all, they're not generalizing. I cannot talk tonight. Generalizing. 2, the use of sophisticated agricultural tools and techniques is the only way to prevent famine. Well, this is where it starts to sound like an opinion. It's like, it's the only way. Okay, there's no facts there. They're not proving that. They're just making an assertion. It might not be the only way. Maybe there's some ways we haven't thought about. So when you see like things where they're like the only way, or it's the worst, or it's the best, that should be a dead giveaway. It's an opinion. 3, the drawbacks of using chemicals in agriculture outweigh the benefits. Well, that's an opinion. You would have to do a cost-benefit analysis and show us that's the case. Otherwise, that's just an opinion. Yeah, well, it outweighs the benefits. Says who? 4, the cost of using bioengineering agricultural technologies is too expensive. So the cost of using bioengineered agricultural technologies is too expensive. Too expensive. So that might be the case for some nations, not the case for all nations. But if you're uncertain, my thing is, well, says who? Who's telling me it's too expensive? How do I know it's too expensive? Maybe it's costly, but does the yield like outweigh this expense? But question 1 says the use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides has increased the yield per unit of land in some regions. So Green Revolution has chemical fertilizers and pesticides. There has been an increase in yield per unit of land, and it has taken place in some regions. Nothing about that is trying to, deal in opinion. There's nothing there that is trying to say one thing's better than the other or vice versa. So just think about, well, which one's a fact? Which one doesn't sound like someone's just kind of speaking about like their own beliefs. Okay, 47. Another political cartoon. Okay, so which statement best reflects the main idea of this 2009 cartoon? So again, I'm going to look at the source, which is David Horsley, Seattle Post Intelligencer, November 18th, 2009. And I'm going to look at the image. So there's a giant iceberg, and it says climate change. And then you have a ship, kind of reminds me of the Titanic. It says world leaders. And it says, it's settled. We agreed to sign a pledge to hold another meeting to consider changing course at a date yet to be determined. So if this is what it says, think about what I'm seeing and what I can infer. What I can infer is that this ship of world leaders is heading directly to this iceberg, which represents climate change. And they're like, well, we agreed to consider changing course at a later date. So they're still heading towards climate change, and they're like, we'll just deal with this another time or later on. So let me see if there's any of these options that match what I inferred. So this is world leaders have done all they can to address climate change. Well, no, they haven't done all they can do to address climate change because they're saying they're going to talk about it at a later date. World leaders are considering the long-term impacts of climate change. Well, there's nothing here that talks about long-term impacts. They just keep saying they're going to talk about this at a later date. 3, climate change is not a serious problem and world leaders need to hold the course. Well, they're not saying that. They're saying that they're going to hold another meeting later on. 4, pledges and meetings have resulted in little significant action on the issue of climate change. Yes, they've met and they agreed they're going to have another meeting and talk about changing course at another date yet to be determined. So they're just pushing it off according to this cartoon. They haven't really accomplished anything. And then the last question is 49. So the technological advances of the astrolabe, the caravel, and improved cartography are most directly related to the, I'm like, did I put this one on? Yes, this is Global 9 content. Let me double check. I did put that on. So this is Global 9. You wouldn't really need to worry about a question about this, which is probably why many of you struggled with it because we didn't really review this. But all these advances just led to the age of exploration. They were able to better map things and chart their courses on their ships. But again, that's a Global 9 content, so you shouldn't have to worry about that. Okay. So I'm going to go over 50 just on the off chance you see something. So your test should be on 1750 forward. And so I didn't put this on your practice test because it goes back to the age of Pericles in ancient Greece. But if you think about ancient Greece, it's best known for Athens' direct democracy. Magna Carta is the Great Charter. It was in Great Britain, and it limited the rights of the powers of the king and protected the rights of the nobles. And then the Petition of Right, again, limiting powers of monarchies. And then Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizens, 1789. This is the first one on this timeline that would actually be on your test. So the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen takes place during the French Revolution, and they are going to identify the rights of man, and talk about how they should be protected. So these would just be milestones of democratic development. Okay? These are all examples of limiting the power of monarchies, or identifying the rights and powers of the people. So if you saw something like that, that'll just help you keep in mind. So it's starting to get late, so what I'm going to do is just kind of go over some tips and tricks for the thematic essay and DBQ, just to reiterate, and then I'll post this video, and tomorrow after class you can submit some more questions, and I'll approach those in my live stream tomorrow night. So thematic essay, it's always about a theme. They'll always give you the theme, and then they will give you a list of suggestions that you're not limited to. Now, if you remember, in class I said, Confucius, Martin Luther, they would not be on here because they are from Global 9. Now, Galileo, I would just be careful with, because he is from the Scientific Revolution, which is before 1750. And what you really need to know about the Scientific Revolution is how it impacted the Enlightenment. So with this transitional test, because it's only on 1750, you need to be careful with your selections. If it doesn't say, in the suggestions, the person, I would play it safe and pick someone else on the, from the suggestions they've given you. And why I say this is, is my understanding that if you had a similar essay you wrote about Galileo, because it's from the Scientific Revolution, you could be denied credit because it's not from 1750 forward. But if you wrote about, say, John Locke or Baron de Montesquieu or Voltaire, for the Enlightenment and how they've attempted to bring about change, you could use Galileo or other people from the Scientific Revolution to show how they kind of set the course by challenging tradition and questioning reality, to try to better understand the universe through the scientific method. And then this leads to people questioning the rights of man and the role of government during the Enlightenment. So just be careful there. A lot of people ask, well, how many body paragraphs? Well, right here she says a well-organized essay that includes an introduction, several paragraphs addressing the task below, and a conclusion. Typically what we would see is an introduction, a paragraph on the first individual, a paragraph on the second individual, and then a conclusion. Great writing usually will have more body paragraphs, but if you follow that general format, you should be fine. You should make sure you use the theme in your introduction, put it into your own words, identify the two individuals, or the two, whatever the theme is, the two revolutions, or the two nationalist leaders, whatever your theme is, it's going to tell you to pick two. Make sure you tell us in your introduction which two. You also need to make sure that you are addressing the task. This has 3 bullets. So that means you need to write at least 3 things for each of these. So it says, describe the historical circumstances that led to this individual to seek change. So for example, if you're writing about Karl Marx, who came up with the Communist Manifesto to identify his theories on communism, you would talk about the Industrial Revolution and how workers were exploited, and how his idea of communism talked about the proletariat, or the workers, rising up to overthrow the bourgeoisie, the middle class, to seize the means of production and have like this worker revolution. So that's, you're setting up the historical circumstances, and then the action taken, you go into the Communist Manifesto and outline his goals of communism, similar to what I was kind of explaining, and then discuss the extent to which the individual's actions was successful in bringing about change. Then you could talk about communism's impact on Russia. And then, was it successful bringing about change? Did it bring about the change that Marx was looking for? Or was it a different type of change? But you need to make sure that you are addressing all 3 of those. And then they'll always give you your guidelines. And I say, this is basically your checklist. When you're done, go back. Did I develop all aspects of the task? Did I describe the historical circumstances? Did I describe the action taken? Did I describe or discuss the extent to which the individual was successful? If you can say yes, then check off that one. Support the theme of relevant facts, examples, and details. Did I use specific names, dates? Did I explain, the theory of communism? Did I mention the Communist Manifesto? You want to be as specific as possible. I do not want to see anyone write anything with the word things in it. I don't want to see he did things or he wrote things or he changed things. Be specific. You should never have things in an academic essay. And then use logical and clear plan of organization, including an introduction and conclusion that will be on a restatement of the theme. Don't just copy the theme, put it into your own words. Have an introduction. Logical and clear plan of organization. Do it in chronological order. These people here are listed in chronological order. So if you're writing about Karl Marx and Mohandas Gandhi, don't write about Gandhi first and then Marx. Put it in chronological order. Do Marx, then Gandhi. And then make sure you have a conclusion. The DBQ is where I see people get the lower grade because you need to have outside information in this. So the DBQ will introduce you to the historical context. So they set up like what's going on. They'll give you 3 options to choose from, and you have to pick 2. Now, my recommendation is brainstorm before you look at the documents. So down below in the space, just jot down what you know about each of the 3 options. So in this case, they talk about scarcity. So people's needs and wants aren't being met with the resources available. Because people, societies, and governments often take action to obtain resources such as food, fresh water, and industrial resources when they are scarce. These actions have had a variety of effects on societies, nations, and regions. So, like, what do you know about shortage of food? What do you know about issues getting access to fresh water? What do you know about lack of industrial resources? So, before I even look at the documents, when I think about food, I automatically jump to the famine, the Irish potato famine, and shortage of food there. Gaining access to fresh water, you might want to think about people who live in the Middle East and very arid desert climate, or even maybe in the Sahara. How do they get access to fresh water? The industrial resources. I automatically think about Japan. They're on an island. They lack resources. They end up having to imperialize other nations to gain those resources. So these are things I would just jot down to brainstorm. And this can help you identify which ones you should focus on in your essay, but also help you to kind of think about what's happening, because the biggest reason people lose points on a DBQ is they don't have outside information. Anything you jot down there is outside information that, if it's not in those documents. And then again, you have your task. This is what you need to write. So you're going to pick 2 resources mentioned in the historical context, and for each, describe the actions taken in response to the scarcity of the source, and then discuss how these actions affected a society, nation, or region. So you're going to describe what they did to try to deal with the scarcity. So how are they trying to overcome this problem? And then how did these actions affect society, nation, or region? And then it goes into the documents in which you would answer all these questions. So this one has a lot of Global 9 content, so it's safe to say you wouldn't see things about the Incas on your DBQ. But keep in mind that you need to answer the questions completely. I recommend that you make sure that you're answering the question. So double check, did I answer the question? And be careful. If it says one action, just give one action. A lot of people sometimes will write down multiple actions. And basically, if you write down more than one action, you only get credit for the first one. So I'm just going to check really quick to see, I'm still good. Everything's good. Okay. The other thing that you could do to try to avoid the biggest issue of not including outside information, one of my recommendations is whenever you read a document, you answer the question. Jot down things that you can connect to the document. Let me find a document. Actually, I have to do a global 10. Okay. Find. It's like really detailed. Find an easy one. Okay, so according to Xander Zwinburne, what is one problem faced by Gaza's population as a result of its almost exclusive reliance on coastal aquifer for its water source? So with no streams or rivers to speak of, Gaza has historically relied almost exclusively on its coastal aquifer, which receives some 50 to 60 million cubic meters of refill each year thanks to rainfall runoff from the Hebron Hills to the east. But the needs of Gaza's rapidly growing population, as well as those of nearby Israeli farmers, means an estimated 160 million cubic meters of water is drawn from the compromised or endangered aquifer each year. As the levels sink, seawater seeps in from the nearby Mediterranean. This saline pollution is made worse by untreated waste, with 90,000 cubic meters of raw sewage allowed to flow into the shallow seawaters each day from Gaza, according to UN data. Even with the aquifer, regular run-in tap water is a luxury unknown to many Gazians. People living across the territory say that during the summer months, water might spurt out of their taps every other day, and the pressure is often so low that those living on upper floors might just see a trickle. So I would write down here that I know the Gaza Strip where this is taking place is in an area that also has a lot of conflict because the Palestinian and Israeli conflict that has been going on, and that's outside information. So you have a population of people living in Gaza. Many of these people are Palestinian refugees, and their water is limited. Now, this is all outside information you can jot down. And this can help you when you're writing about this. These people, struggle to gain access to fresh water amongst all these other conflicts that they're dealing with. And that can help to understand some of the issues that they're faced with. They can't just leave. Many of these people, again, are refugees. Okay. So at the end of all of your documents, after you've answered all of the questions for all of the documents, they'll repeat your essay. It's not a third essay. This is just the DBQ essay being repeated, so you don't have to flip back to the beginning. And they'll be a little bit more specific here. They'll give you a nice guideline that you can use again to check. Did I describe the actions taken and how these actions affected that society, nation, or region? Did I incorporate information from at least 4 documents? You need at least 4 of the documents, or they'll tell you if they want more. I recommend using every document that applies to the topic you wrote about. Don't just do 4. Don't get lazy. Use the information. That's going to help you. It's not going to hurt your essay using an additional document for a topic. As long as it's, the topics you chose. So if you're looking at food and fresh water, don't use a document for industrial resources. Make sure you're looking at the documents included, but use as many as you can. And this is the thing here that I keep talking about. Incorporate relevant outside information. If you want a high score, you need the outside information. So, like I said, for each document, see if there's something you can connect to it. That's outside information. If you jot it in the margins, this will help you remember to incorporate it. Then it says support the theme with relevant facts, examples, and details. Again, use names, use dates. Use the test to take the test. Go back to the multiple choice. See if there's anything you can use there. And the other thing, too, is if you want a top score, you need analysis. You need to explain why these actions taken have caused these effects. You need to make sure that you're explaining the significance or the importance here. A lot of people will answer the questions to the documents and then not actually use those answers. Those answers that you write down are sentences that you can put into your essay, and they help you build analysis. Don't ignore the responses you made. I often will see people be like, oh yeah, the map in document 7B shows Japan gaining territory. Well, it says one way Japan tried to solve its shortage of industrial resources. That's what you should be saying is, according to 7B, one way Japan tried to solve its shortage of industrial resources was by becoming imperialistic and acquiring new territories in Manchuria and Korea. as these areas were geographically close to Japan. So if that's going to help you build analysis and really make your essay solid. So don't ignore your responses to those questions. And again, just make sure that it's a logical plan of organization, introduction, body paragraphs, conclusion. And, I honestly, I think, after you're done answering the questions, if you have time, and really, even taking 5 minutes, totally worth it. Sketch out a basic outline. This is the action they took. These are the documents that address that. This is how it affected it. These are the documents that deal with those actions. And then here's some outside information. Just so when you're writing, you can see what you want to include and you don't forget anything. And I think that's the main tips I have. In our Google Classroom, I did post Mr. Class 30 global tips. I took this from Mr. Class website, and I've cut out the tips that apply only to Global 9. So you might see it skip. So for example, 8 goes to 10 because 9 was about like religion, and you don't necessarily have to worry about that. But before, when I said if you see green revolution, go with food choice. Salad is green and it's food. Again, like these little tips that help you kind of remember. Let's see. There's also a really good information on the thematic essay in Mr. Class Global Tips. He's very knowledgeable. And just like I did, he had recommended to know like the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution well, because those are great for thematics. You can use them right here. He's talking about, you can use them to write about change, conflict, war, turning points. So you can write like 4 essays on those 2 topics. But even if you knew, the Russian Revolution well, you could also use Vladimir Lenin as a nationalist leader. If you know the phases of the French Revolution well, you could talk about Maximilien Robespierre as a nationalist leader. So, you could also do this for individuals and nationalist leaders. Work smart, not hard. If you know general ideas, you'll do fine on the multiple choice, but you do need to know a few things really well for the thematic essay. And if you struggle with those outlines we did in class the other day on the French Revolution, there's a nice rundown here of what's happening, what causes it, in Mr. Class 30 Global Tips. And he does the same thing for the Russian Revolution, the causes and the slogan, etc. So I would make sure you have those outlines done because that'll be really helpful for you. The other thing I posted in Google Classroom, and I think this was like being all funky, wasn't loading properly, but I've been posting our keys, and I've updated to include the last of the keys for their work even due tomorrow. And I know some of you were asking about the causes of World War I. So that's in there. So, you just think about mania, militarism. They have big armies. They're developing new technology. This leads to competition and threats and fear. Alliance systems. Europeans are forming alliances to prepare for war, Central Powers versus allies. And this is going to get them pulled into conflict once the war breaks out. Nationalism, they see their country as being superior. They want to prove that to the world, and they want to build it up. Nationalism can also help divide. So if you remember, Serbia is upset that Austria-Hungary had been gaining land in the Balkan Peninsula. So that's down here. And so Serbian nationalists who wanted to kick Austria-Hungary out of the Balkan Peninsula are going to be responsible for the spark, that the assassination. Imperialism, you see competition for colonies around the world. Again, if you want to prove your nation's superior, you are going to have the biggest empire. So you're going to have to imperialize and compete for colonies, in which you're going to need a big military to defend those empires. And then, of course, the Archduke Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, is assassinated, and this starts the war. And this, was an issue of, all of these building up here. You have Austria-Hungary being imperialistic, taking over areas in the Balkans, but then you have Serbians wanting to unite all the Slavs in the Balkan Peninsula under their control to push Austria-Hungary out of the Balkan Peninsula, which had been part of the Ottoman Empire. But remember, by World War I, Ottoman Empire is weak. There's a lot of tension. There's a lot of ethnic conflict because so many ethnicities live in the Balkan Peninsula. People saw the Ottoman Empire as the sick man of Europe because it's a very old empire and it's losing its power and control and it's becoming weak. Ultimately, Serbian nationalists, Gavrilo Princip was the one to pull the trigger, organized the plot, and carried out the plot to assassinate the Archduke Franz Ferdinand in World War I started. So that was one of the topics you guys have brought up. But if you see, you can go through these slides, double check your responses, and then if you have questions, you can ask me about them. But they should be pretty thorough. And I think I'll probably add in like a few more things just to kind of round this out. But it goes through all the main content, general ideas, and again, if you have questions, please submit them, and I'll be doing this again tomorrow. I apologize for the late start. I had some technical difficulties. But just to remind you that our test is Tuesday, June 5th. It's at 8 a.m., so that's when we start, which means that you should be at school by 7:30. If you want to come in earlier, I will be in our classroom before the test to talk to you. You need 2 pens, dark blue or black ink. You will have 30 multiple choice questions on the 10th grade content. You'll have your thematic essay, and you will have your DBQ. And I just realized this is, boom, out of order. I don't know why that's out of order. Why did no one catch that? This has been like this for like weeks now. Okay, boom. So 30 multiple choice, then you have your thematic essay, and then you have your DBQ essay. Yay! I really like the DBQ because what's nice about the DBQ is even if you didn't know anything about those topics, they give you enough information in the documents to write something. You'll get credit. You just make sure you have to complete the task. That's the biggest thing for all the essays, complete the task. And then the second biggest thing for the DBQ, outside information. But use our resources, right, in our Google Classroom. I'm going to go there really quick. There's so many resources in our Google Classroom that you should look at, okay? So if you're not certain, just go down to the Regents review topic and you will see the key to our review packet. You will see Mr. Clapp's tips. You will see my 3 hours of video from last year broken down with timestamps. You can submit more questions. You have information on decolonization, independence. All of these